你好, welcome to Ask Andy. In this video, our topic is Chinese numbers 04. We're going to talk about big numbers in Chinese. I'm going to answer 3 questions. Question number 1. 1001. Do we read it as 1001 or 1001 in Chinese? So I'm going to answer that question, and I'm going to teach you numbers from 1001 to 9999. Question number 2. 10,000. Do we read 10,000 as 10,000 in Chinese? So I'm going to answer that question and teach you numbers up to 900,000 in Chinese. Question number 3. How to say 1 million and 1 billion in Chinese? So when it comes to talking about like the population in your city or in your country, maybe you're going to need those big numbers. Let's get started. Question number 1. 1001. Do we read it as 1001 or 1001? I'm sorry to let you know, neither of them is correct. Both of them are wrong. So we read it as 1001 in Chinese. That is 1001. 1001. And then you may ask, how do we know there are 2 zeros? Because we say 1 here. We are going to know there are 2 zeros there. And for 1010, we read it as 1010. So that is 1010. 1010. See, we are going to have a 10 here. So it won't be confusing for us to tell the difference between 1001 and 1010. Let's move on. So for 1002, it's the same. So we read it as 1002. That is 1002. 1002. And then for 1020, we read it as 1002 tenths. That is 1020. 1020. And then let's move on. For 1009, the same. So we read it as 1009. That is 1009. 1009. And then for 1090, we read it as 1009 tenths. 1090. 1090. And then what about 1100? Actually, this one is easy because it's almost exactly the same as the one we have in English. So we read it as 1100. 1100. 1100. So for the colloquial one, you may hear people omit the last unit. So it may be 1001. 1001. Remember, this is the colloquial one. So you may hear it in your HSK listening or in China. For native Chinese, they are going to talk in that way. But I don't recommend you to say that. For 1111, so we just read it as 1111. 1111. And then let's move on. So what about 1200? So for 1200, we can read it as 1200. 1200 or 1200. 1200. So remember, for the colloquial one, we can read it as 1200. 1200. So again, I don't recommend you to say that. That is for native Chinese to talk. And then what about this number? 1234. So you can think about it in your mind. So that will be 1203 times 4. 1234. 1234. You can also read it as 1234. 1234. Which one do I recommend? I recommend you to read the first one. 1234. And then let's move on. So what about this one? 1500. This is easy. We just read it as 1500. So that will be 1500. 1500. So for the colloquial one, you may hear it as 1500. 1500. What about this one? 1567. So think about it in your mind. So that will be 1506 times 7. So that is 1567. 1567. Easy, right? Okay, let's move on. 1900. Easy. So 1900. 1900. For the colloquial one, 1900. 1900. What about this one? 1999. So we are going to read it as 1909 tenths 9 in Chinese. That is 1999. 1999. Done. Easy, right? Let's move on. So remember this. So 2000 is read as 2000, but not 2000 in Chinese. So we never read it as 2000 in Chinese. So just keep that in your mind. See this one. So 2001, the same. We read the 2 zeros as only one. So that would be 2001. 2001. And then 2010, 2010. 2010. That's it. It's easy, right? Let's move on. So what about this one? 2200. So that will be 2200. 2200 or 2200. 2200. So for the colloquial one, you can read it as 2200. 2200. And then what about this number? 2345. So think about it in your mind. So that would be 2304 tenths 5. So that is 2345. 2345. That's it. And then let's move on. 5500. So that will be 5500. 5500. For the colloquial one, we can omit the last unit. So it becomes 5500. 5500. And then what about this one? Think about it. 5607 tenths 8. That will be 5678. 5678. Easy. Okay, let's move on. For this one, 6789. Same. So that will be 6789. 6789. The last one, 9999. So that will be 9999. 9999. Easy, right? Okay, we have done question number 1. Let's move on to question number 2. Is 10,000 read as 10,000 in Chinese? Let's do it. So, question number 2. Is 10,000 read as 10,000 in Chinese? I'm sorry to let you know. It's wrong. We don't read it as 10,000 in Chinese. We have a special unit in Chinese. That is, so 10,000, we read it as 1,000. 1,000. So here is the thing for the tone change of yi. So because 1 is the fourth tone, so we are going to read yi as the second tone. So will be 1,000. 1,000. It's related to the tone change rules of number 1. You can refer to my previous video here about the tone change rules of number 1, yi. So we have a special unit, so that is for 10,000. We can take that 10,000 as 1 in Chinese. Let's move on. So what about this one? So this is 11,000 in English. So when we read it in Chinese, we are going to have this 10,000 as just one unit. So it will be 1,100. 1,100. So for 1,100, so the last unit is 千. So it's possible for us to omit the last unit. And then what about this one? 20,000. Remember, we don't have 20,000. In our mind, that will be 4 zeros as one unit. So we are going to read it as 10,000. That will be 2万. 2万. And then what about this number? 23,456. So remember, we are going to have 10,001 as 1 unit. So in our mind, this is 2 10,000. And we have 3,456. So that would be 23,456. 23,456. I know for this point is really different, so different from English. So I don't recommend you to say that much. You can write them down, type it in your phone to show to others, because it's really complicated to say that, because you have to convert from English, the English one, 10,000 into this one in Chinese. That's not easy. Okay, let's move on. So what about this one? So we have 100,000. Remember the rule is we have this 4 zeros as 1 unit. So when you do it, I recommend you to write them down first. First write them down and then you separate it. So 4 zeros, that will be 1. And then the left will be 10. So you just read this 10 plus that 10,000. Then you know how to read it. So that will be 10,000, which is 10万. 10万. See, it's not that difficult. And then what about this one? 110,000, the same trick. So just separate the 4 zeros from 11. Then the left is just 11. So read 11 first, and then plus the 4 zeros as a 1. So that will be 11万. 11万. And then what about this one? The same thing. So just do 4 zeros. The rest is 20, right? So you just read 20 and then plus 1. That will be 20万. 20万. It's not that difficult, right? But I don't recommend you to say it, because when you need to say it, you have to do it in your mind. I recommend for these big numbers, write them down and then you can see it clearly. Then you read it. And then what about this one? So 567,000. So first thing you do is, first you need to separate it. So what's left is 56. So first you read that 56, and then you have 7,000 left. 56, 10,000, 7,000. That is 56万7千. 56万7千. And then what about this one? The same thing. So we need to separate it. So we have 99 left. So we need to read this 99 plus 10,000 and then the rest 9,999. So that will be 99万9千999. 99万9千999. It's not that difficult, but the thing is, if you have to convert it in your mind and say it, that's really tricky. Okay, we have done question number 1 and question number 2. Right now is the moment for us to do question number 3. How to say 1 million and 1 billion in Chinese. Okay, how to do that? So it's here. So remember the same thing. So we have this 4 zeros separated first. So we are going to have 100 left. So we read it as 110,000. So that is 100万. 100万. And then what about this one? It is, so this is 10 million. So for 10 million in English, in Chinese, we read it as 1,000, 10,000. So that is 1,000万. 1,000万. And then what about this one? This is different. We have a new unit, a different one from English. So this one is 亿. 亿. So this one is 100 million. So we can read it as 1亿. 1亿 or 1个亿. 1个亿. I think we try to avoid the confusion from this one and that one for the tones, so we create a 个 here. So I recommend you, when you read it, you have that 个 there. 1个亿. 1个亿. So we know that is 100 million. And then let's move on. This one. So that is 1 billion. So 1 billion in Chinese, you see, we have this new unit as yi, right? So the rest is 10. So we are going to read it as 10个亿. 10个亿. So that 个 is optional. So you can read it as 10亿. 10亿. But because it sounds like 11, 11, so I recommend you to keep that 个 there when you say it. 10个亿. 10个亿. So we know we are talking about 1 billion. And then what about this number? So that is the population of China. That is 1.4 billion. So that will be 1,400,000,000. So we read it as, here we separate it. So what we have is 14. So we read it as 14亿. 14亿. Because we already have 4 here, so we don't really need to keep that 个. So you may hear people say it as 14亿. So that is the population of China. Some learners ask me, they are trying to figure out which language, which Asian language to learn, Japanese, Korean, or Mandarin Chinese. I say, it's easy to answer that question. Which one for you to choose to learn? Think about it. What's the population of China, Japan, and South Korea? It's easy for you to tell which one is more worthwhile for you to learn. If you have learned Chinese, you can talk to 1.4 billion people in the world. It's great. It's amazing, right? Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for watching. 再见.